Welcome to the 2013 Fusion Podcast, presented to you by the Oregon Ministry Network. Fusion took place November 14th through 16th at People's Church in Salem. The following workshop, entitled Managing Ministry Without Losing Your Marriage, was brought to us by Lee and Cindy McCloud.
Well, this is my wife, Cindy, and I'll let her introduce us and our family a little bit to you.
So Lee and I have been married for 33 years. We'll be married 34 in March. And we've liked each other for 15. No, I'm kidding. Seems like it, though. And anyway, we have 3 daughters, and 32, 29, and 24. And a son-in-law and 2 grandkids, Olivia and Trace, that are 7 and 9, and so they grew up in a pastor's home and did ministry with us because we kind of did ministry as a family together. And so anyway, that's a little bit about us.
And I said in my prayer and acknowledged the fact that we are definitely not experts. And so hopefully you didn't come to hear experts. If you did, you need to go to that's the workshop on the other side of the wall. But honestly, we are learning. We're continuing to learn. I think Cindy and I would agree that we're more happy right now in our marriage, personally, in our relationship, than we've ever been in our lives. And of course, we're not in Row Ministry. We serve in the network office. No, I'm kidding. That is Row Ministry. But it always cracks you up when somebody asks you what you do, and you try to tell them, and you go, well, I'm a pastor. I'm a youth pastor, a children's pastor, and you never. You don't even know how to explain that. I hate it when I'm sitting on an airplane, somebody says, well, what do you do? And so I'm trying to figure out this really cool answer that doesn't lead into this long description, because they think we only work like 1 day a week, right? And but in our ministry and in our life together, honestly, we are continuing to grow all the time. And we have made a commitment a number of years ago to each other that we would continue to do that. Now, one thing we do know for certain is this, that strong marriages go a long way towards strong ministries. And maybe another way that we could say it is this, that if you have a poor marriage, it's nearly impossible to have a strong ministry. There have been occasions where there were poor marriages and strong ministries, but I think back in the day, the generations that preceded us, there were more of those then than there are now, because in that day it was kind of, well, we're in this till death do us part, we don't quit. We continue to do it. So I have acquaintances that I have known that have had a very poor marriage, and yet God somehow blessed them in a strong marriage ministry because they decided to stick it out. But you don't see that today. And I think the more transparent our generations are becoming, and the more that we should be transparent, we want to make sure that our ministries and marriages are strong. And so we think they go hand in hand. Now here's a fact. On one side, you've got the devil that opposes you in every way. He doesn't want you to be a believer. He doesn't want you to be a minister. He doesn't want you to have a strong godly relationship in marriage. He opposes it. On the other hand, you've got God, who's just opposite of that. He wants you to have a strong everything, be a fully devoted follower of Him, and reflect His glory here on this earth. And here's the key, guys. In the middle of those two extremes, we stand with the deciding vote. And if you will remember that, when hell comes to you and says you're not going to make it, or your marriage will not make it, or whatever, you can easily come back to Him and say, that is not the case at all. And, if God be for us, who can be against us? God and me, or God and us in a marriage, that always will override all of the statistics stacked in your favor. So it's kind of from that perspective that we want to talk about. The other piece that I want to say, and then we're just going to talk back and forth and open it up for Q&A, or we'll be done really early, one of the two, if you don't have any questions and stuff like that. I want to tell you about an analogy that I have used for a number of years in describing ministry, and the same thing works for godly marriage. Okay, and the analogy is of a rowboat. If you think of a rowboat, you know that. For those of you that are fishermen in the Northwest, I'm not talking about a drift boat because the analogy doesn't work for a drift boat. But in a rowboat, when you grab the oars that are anchored on each side in what is called oar locks, and you grab those oars, you know that if I want to go from point A to point B, and I grab those oars and I start down that path on my way to wherever I'm going, it's very important that I use both oars at once. Would you agree? And if at any time I stop using one of the oars, what happens? You go in a circle. And the only way that you can kind of offset that is if you jerk it out of the oar lock and you kind of handle it like a paddle, and still, at best, in a rowboat, you'll do this because it's not a canoe. It's not a canoe. And so you need both oars. In ministry and in godly marriages, most of us understand one of the oars, which is the spiritual side of things. In ministry, many of you have been equipped in one way or the other, perhaps through Bible college. Certainly, somehow you've embraced your call and you said, now we're going to go forward in ministry. And we shouldn't have to teach you. In other words, all of the effort should not be on, in a meeting like this, would not be on this one oar that says, well, you ought to pray. You know, you ought to be a Christian. That's a good place to start. You know, you ought to be on your face before God, seeking His will. You know most of those things. You know how to do church. You know how to do a service. You know how to do a lot of that kind of stuff. And compare that to marriage. In that marriage, you know that, you know, if this is going to be a godly marriage, God needs to be at the center of it. So there are some things that you know on that one oar. But the other oar in both ministry and marriage is the one that tends to trip us up a lot. And the other oar in ministry is the practical side. It's the people that some people can pray me under the table. They're so spiritual, and I don't mean that derogatory. They're gifted that way. But they couldn't grow a church if their life depended on it. And one of the reasons they can't grow their ministry is because they don't address practical, normal, everyday things on this other side. Look at the life of Christ. Not once in the Gospels, which are the record of his life here on earth, not once do you find him ever offending a non-believer. Never. Now, he got sideways often with the religious folks, especially the highly religious, but he never offended non-believers. He had this amazing ability of having a woman caught in the act of adultery, and while keeping within the law and grace and mercy applied, he sent everybody away, including the accusers, and it appeared that all of them left, and they were satisfied with what had just happened, while at the same time not condoning sin. It's incredible. You see what I'm saying? And here's the word I want to use, and you're going to hear Cindy and I say this a lot today. They were students of the people they served. Now, I know churches have become so businesslike, and so everything is such a business, and it all works off from a spreadsheet under a mission statement and all of that, that all of a sudden they can't grow a church either. See, if I let go of either of these oars, I go in a circle. You can be highly spiritual and go in circles in your ministry. If you don't understand that if you act like an idiot, nobody's going to follow you. If you don't understand people skills, if you don't know how to get along, if you won't play well with others in the sandbox. Same way in in marriage. You can be a most godly man or woman under the heading of God, and you're up there floating in the clouds off in nothing but prophetic land all you want. But if you don't come back down and understand how to relate to the person God put close to you and understand who they are, then you are not going to have much of a marriage. Okay? So with those two things in mind, we just want to talk about some practical things and go forward from there. So
we had talked about the practical thing of becoming a student. And I think the thing with us, it probably, literally, when I said 15 years, it probably took us 15 years to figure out if we're going to make this thing work, because we battled back and forth, was we need to become students of each other. And with that, I'm talking about, you heard me mention earlier, and maybe in both of the things that we did, about love languages. Literally, I'm telling you, if you have not read that book or you don't know about those, get that. It's such a huge thing, because I remember early on to learn how to become a student of each other, because I was a way quality time person, and physical touch and closeness is like way at the bottom of my list. And this is Mr. Physical Touch and Closeness, and quality time was way at the bottom of his list. So we were totally not even connecting whatsoever in our marriage. So once we began to learn that key ingredient, and then to learn how each other was wired, so find out, how is your spouse wired? What is their likes and dislikes? I remember one time I was so excited when we first got married and I made him a pineapple upside down cake for his birthday. Well, he hates pineapple. And so it was just like the worst thing ever to him. And so, I mean, little things like that. To become a student of each other to the points of your likes and dislikes. What does he like to do for his off time, you know? What does his downtime look like? Because my downtime is go in and sit down and watch a brain-dead movie or something so that I don't have to think. And his downtime is go outside and mow the lawn. And things like that bothered me.
That's because you told me to. But
no, I didn't. Because I kept thinking, why do you not want to be in the house, you know, with me, spending time together? You know, because we're, you know, we won't be together if we're outside mowing the lawn. But I had to figure out how he ticks, what his downtime, because he can get out, he can process, he can whack the weeds if he feels like whacking somebody else, or, you know what I mean? Just figure out the little things in your relationship that makes each other tick. And it's like, when you first started dating, you were so excited and you did the things for that person. And then all of a sudden it's like, you're married a couple of years and things kind of become settled in and you kind of lose that thing. Don't forget to date your spouse. Date your spouse.
Yeah, and when you find out things about each other, one of the things that we see people get in trouble over time and time and time again, and that is, it's not even, you know something about the spouse. Well, let me say it this way. It's knowing when to say things. So, for instance, when I would come in from the office, I am spent mentally. My mind is tired. And if I walk through the door and Cindy bombards me with all of the problems of raising 3 kids and all of that without giving me a little bit of downtime, I always respond incorrectly. And she was not wrong in what she said. The only thing that made it wrong was the timing. And it wasn't, and that sounds selfish, but she has her timing as well. Mm-hmm. She gets up this morning earlier than normal for her. And, I don't speak to her for 20 or 30 or 40 minutes. And, I don't want to get hurt. No, I'm kidding. It's just not the good time. Mornings aren't good for her. But the same would be true for me right when I walked in the door. These are the practical sides of things. Because I hear people say the right thing at the wrong time, and it causes major problems. Was it Solomon that said that it's the little foxes that spoil the vine? It's little things down the road. You don't even know what you said. It wasn't even so much what you said, it was when you said it. But you won't know that if you're not a student.
Well, and then, another thing is women can tend to be more detail-oriented than guys. And so and one thing that we learned about each other was, this is just give me the bottom line, just want the bottom line. We don't have to go into all the detail, I just want the bottom line. And so, if you're a woman that wants to share all the detail about everything during the day, don't do it. If your spouse is a bottom line guy, just give him the bottom line. And now I kind of laugh because it annoys me, the whole detail thing. Sometimes I'm like sitting with people that's going into detail and I'm just like, get to the point. Because it's like I've learned to become a student of him and just get to the point, here's the bottom line, that you find yourself kind of becoming just like that. And just like, just the little things that can wreck a relationship.
And on the other side, because I was so bottom line, I needed to understand that for her, the detail was very important. And she's a verbal processor, which is another teaching in and of itself. How does your spouse process? You've got to figure that piece out, because if you don't, you'll drive each other nuts.
Because he was always trying to fix me. I'd say something and he's going to give me the answer of how to make that better. And I'm like, I don't need the answer. I know what the answer is. I just want to get it out. I need to just process out loud.
So now I say to her, like I did last week, if I'm supposed to be in on this conversation, will you let me know? In other words, am I supposed to comment, or are you just venting right now?
I'm venting.
And I see some of you laughing and looking at each other. You understand exactly what I'm talking about. Also, understanding a verbal processor. Everything that I process mentally, a verbal processor processes out loud. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the significance of that. By the time I speak it out of my mouth, I've already processed it and I've arrived at a conclusion. A verbal processor, on the other hand, is saying it out loud. And so you hear them saying these things, and it's very common for them at a future date when you say to them, but you said this, they go, no, I didn't. And they're not lying. That was not their conclusion. And until they've arrived at a conclusion, it was just part of the process. You did it internally, they did it out loud. Does that make sense? Well, when I figured that out, man, it saved a lot of hard knocks. And when I started realizing, because I would get ticked off, I said, no, you said it. And she said, I did not say that. And I go, yes, you did. And so you're now into this, healthy argument. He said, she said. And the reality was, while she said it out of her mouth, I had thought it in my mind, but she had not yet arrived at her conclusion. And that just helped me tremendously. So, but those are things that you learn. And there are all kinds of helps, and there's wonderful books, and there's wonderful teachings that'll help you guys do that. And remember, we're talking about these two oars, okay? You can be extremely godly and doing ministry together, and in the church, things seem to be flourishing and doing pretty well. But you will start going in circles if you can't communicate with each other over here on this other side. Another area we want to talk about is priorities and boundaries. And we have to determine priorities and we have to determine boundaries. And I want to make this emphasis, okay, that works for you and your family. The older I get, the more ridiculous I know that it is for me to tell you what the proper boundaries in your family is. I'm not your family. I'm me. I'm who I am, and I know that I have to answer for the way that we are wired. Not every family does things the same. And I mentioned briefly, because I was hesitant to go into too many details in the first part of today, that we're always looking for balance. Let me make a really hard statement, and then I'll come back and I'm not going to talk about this one too much. But the word balance or anything that remotely resembles it, give me a biblical example of that anywhere in the New Testament. What we often contend for and call balance as Americans comes from a very secular mindset. Jesus made these weird statements like, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Having put your hand to the plow and looking back, you're not fit for the kingdom or the work of the kingdom. Let the dead bury the dead. And you just go, man, come on, God. So I believe in balance. What I cannot support and what I have learned through my life, my dad was a missionary, full-time contractor. We lived in the parsonage. He picked up people in the Speed the Light van. When you walked out of our living room, you walked onto the platform of the church. He later became a church planter. And what I discovered in his life is you could never divide the pie correctly if all you were trying to do was give equal portions, because it never worked. It never worked. You were full-time called to this fully devoted follower of Christ, which included all of those present assignments. So how we figured out how to deal with that is we, as a family, decided what does it look like in our family. We couldn't say, well, we gave 3 hours here, so we'll take 3 hours here. That never worked for us. But what we could say is, we're spending time here. How do we either include this portion over here in ministry and or either way it could go, or how do we set aside? And it changed all the time. Just when we thought we had it figured out, it would change. And it primarily had to do with where we were in ministry and how old our kids were and what their needs were. And the only way you get that done is if the two of you continue to talk it through. Because it never works, guys. You just can't do it. I mean, I love date nights, and I love all of that, and I think you should have all of those things that work for you. But there might come a portion of your life or a piece where you can't do a date night that looked like the date nights you used to do. If that happens, does it throw you completely off kilter? If it does, you need to go back and say, well, it's not working right now, but it'll come another time. I mean, we have so many date times together now, she wants to get rid of me because the kids are out of the house and everything has changed, and we do ministry together and we drive all over the state together and all of those kinds of things. You understand what I mean? I believe in boundaries, and I believe in working on balance, but you have to take your stances, you have to take the way you're wired, you have to take where your family and kids and your ministry is, and you run all that back by God and say, God, in light of all of this, what does balance look like for us? Does that make sense? Okay, to talk about some practical stuff.
Practical boundaries. I kind of wanted to talk about a few different things, like, putting boundaries up with the opposite sex. So we talked about today, I think, in one of the other things where, it was this morning when Brian was talking about, setting boundaries and, I don't know, just different things that he was talking about. And in the day and age that we live in, it's so, there's an influx of people that just, want to be around you or want to this or that. And I remember in our marriage and in our ministry, people can look at your spouse, whoever it is, if you're up on this platform, I don't care if you're man, woman, whatever, and always think, wow, it must be great living with them. They're just perfect, or they're this or they're that. And to always guard those boundaries with people. I remember early on with us, to this day, I had mentioned about covering each other's backs this morning, where you can be like with youth or wherever thing that you're in, and there'll be a younger teenage 18-year-old youth in your youth group that's thinking, wow, the youth pastor's wife's really cute, or you know what I'm saying? And so be wise to set up boundaries. Don't pray with them alone. If you're the youth pastor in this room, don't meet with those youth girls alone. Set up things or times. Invite your spouse. If you've got to meet with the opposite sex, make sure your spouse is right there with you all the time. Or somebody else that is, I remember there's an older lady, Sue, an older lady, in our church that was just like his spiritual covering. If a woman went down to the platform and he's going to be down there, boom, there comes Sue. She was his guardian protector.
Because I had asked her to.
Yeah. Because women would, if he laid a hand on somebody, or, you just never want to have something perceived inaccurately.
Just a second, let me say one thing about that led to this. I one time was accused of inappropriate behavior with a particular lady in our church, and it went through a long process that ultimately went clear to general counsel, and I got called in by our superintendent here on the state level, and my board had handled it amazingly well. You know what brought that on? She was a person that her and her family had been saved in our church at an altar on a Sunday morning with a full line of people. When I walked by her name is not Sue, I'll use that word, but I said to this lady, and I said this, I said, Sue, I love you and your family, and we're here for you. When it got to the general superintendent's office and the reports and the files this thick, the accusation was I had told her I loved her.
I love you, Sue, was all she heard.
And that's all she heard. And see, you think, man, I never thought about that kind of stuff. Well, neither did I. I never thought of that. Who wouldn't say something like that in a moment of prayer and somebody you had led to the Lord and all of that kind of stuff? So that's why it's important. And so from then on, I asked Sue, I'm looking at Joan because Joan was part of our church, but I asked Sue and a couple of other of the older ladies, and when I say older than myself, not my mother's age, but quite a bit older, if my wife is not available or it's in a service she's not there, when somebody comes down, will you come right here with me? And I also got to the point where I never laid hands on any ladies again. You go, oh, come on. Well, that came about because another lady one day, Joan, you don't know this, but on the right-hand side of our church there was a lady standing over nearly at the end of the aisle during a worship time, and I had walked to the back to tell somebody in the media we wanted to do something, and then the worship was about done. This lady was standing with her hands in the air like this. Well, there wasn't enough distance between the wall and where she was, and I walked up and put my hand under her arm, which was up, like this, just to let her know I was there, and she just went like this, and that was all it was, and I went by. Later, she told the board that I touched her inappropriately, and I was making advances towards her. You say, these things don't happen. These are exactly the things that happen. Now let me say something else about the boundaries, okay? If hell cannot keep me from being a believer or a minister, the next tactic I think that is most often used is this. Hell then tries to convince me of how sorry of one that I am, how sorry of a Christian, how sorry of a minister. And what happens in these kinds of scenarios is the first thing that probably came to your mind when I started saying that was, well, you know, but or it will happen if you try to put these kinds of boundaries in place where you're at. Hell will start saying, yeah, but who's going to minister to them? If you were any kind of a pastor, you would love on them. If you really, it starts turning it back against you and trying to convince. It's like I commit that I'm going to read the Word every day and I miss a couple of days. What does hell do? Hell can't get you to walk away from God, but hell then begins to whisper in your ear and say, well, you're not going to stick with that regimen anyway. You might as well quit. You know you're not good enough. You know you can't live up to that. Isn't that the game that he plays with us? And he does the same thing in ministry. So when he comes to you, recognize that. Tell him to get behind you and put some real boundaries in place that will help you to make sure that doesn't happen. Is it fair for everyone? Of course not. But isn't it always a few circumstances and situations that cause us to react differently to everyone anyway? Mm-hmm. Other practical boundaries.
Appointments, okay, meeting with the opposite sex. Internet. If you really want to be, have set up boundaries, Covenant Eyes, 3X Watch, give your spouse the password. Make sure your pastor or, somebody's names, like with Lee, Pastor Bill, our superintendent, and I get all of everything that he goes on the internet with every week so that we know where he's at. We've got it on his iPhone, his iPad, and his computer.
Accountability works if you want to be accountable.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be accountable, you can say you're an accountability group all you want, but all you have to do is lie. Right? Some of you guys are much smarter than me. You can get around all of those filters. But I tell you, if you're serious about it, there's nobody on the face of the earth that will keep me as accountable as this lady in this area. And if that doesn't work, your boss.
Yeah. And I remember, there's been a few times that something would pop up on it, and I'd be, what is that? And I went to him, and I said, what is this? And it took one of our IT tech guys to go, no, he wasn't on that site. This is what it filtered it, and that's why it showed up. And I'm like, okay, because he was going to be in big trouble.
Well, I shouldn't have been. I was in bed with her. It was 2:30 in the morning. I go, I wasn't up. And it was an old filter system that would catch anything that tried to come to your email.
So put up boundaries on yourself. And especially if you struggle in those areas, make sure you set those boundaries. Another one's TV. I know, like for us, because he likes his outdoor shows, so the package with our TV to get those outdoor shows so he can watch his hunting and fishing also comes with the free, HBO and Stars and all of that. Well, I'm thinking, number one, I don't want company, my grandkids, or anybody else to walk into our home, flip on the TV, and bing, there's like stuff you shouldn't even have on TV, and all of a sudden they're like, wow. Block those channels. Don't tell anybody the password. I know our kids just laugh, but I have them password protected so that if anybody did, because we have a lot of people staying in our home, if they want to watch TV, I don't want, maybe they have issues. It's my home, and I set the boundaries up.
But that's not the reason we password protected it.
Well,
it's the guy sitting right here.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying in general.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's a benefit. But I want you guys to understand that I don't trust me. And Cindy said a while ago, you need to put those filters on everything you've got. Let me just have all the women go, na, 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 and just close your ears for a minute. But every guy in this room, you need the filter, period. Because I don't trust you if you say you don't have problems with those things. Because everything about your flesh is wired to do that. And so for us, I said, Cindy, everything from, on the television thing, everything from here to here, I want it all blocked. Block it all. And you keep the password, because I do not trust me. I don't go there. I don't frequent it intentionally. I don't do those things. But invariably, you're flipping a channel and you see something you shouldn't see, and you give. The Bible says in the King James, in one place that we are to flee the very appearance of evil. And I think there are times that we just got to stay away from that.
So the other day, he's like, because we have a TV in our bedroom, and he goes, I thought you had all of these channels blocked, and I said, I do. And he goes, well, they're not all blocked. So he marched me from the bedroom to the family room to the upstairs living room and sat down and said, I want all of these channels blocked. So we sat there together and blocked, all of these channels that he wanted blocked. That's setting up healthy boundaries and being accountable.
Yeah, so I think it's important that you do that. The last piece, and then we'll have some Q&A, is there needs to be a shared focus on ministry. And what I mean by that, or what we mean by that more than anything, is you need to, first of all, agree on your calling. I'm not saying both husband and wife should always 100% have the exact same calling. In fact, that might be a little boring. And maybe I should say that different, the exact same giftings within callings. But if God has called you to whatever you're called to, it's extremely important. In fact, it almost will never work if both of you do not feel some sort of a shared calling. So that's important, number one. And number two, along those same lines, is once you have a shared calling, you need to talk about philosophy in terms of how you do ministry. There are some things I remember my dad setting our family down and saying, we don't do this because we're the pastors or the missionaries or whatever. We do this because this is how we are in the McCloud home. And I think that it's important that you have the same sort of talks about ministry. How do you see ministry? Do you see ministry as a 1 hour gig a week? If you do and you both agree and it's okay with your lead pastors, then you figure out what that looks like. But if one of you see it as a full-time event, I'm called to this every day, 24/7, and the other sees this as an hour a week, you can imagine the problem. So you need to discuss what that looks like. And again, please, if I can emphasize one thing, you have to understand in ministry and in marriage, you cannot say you've arrived and stop there. You have to keep that boat rowing, and it will change. It changes in seasons of life with everything from energy to demands to finances. All of that changes everything. The important thing is you continue to communicate. As a lead pastor, we used to have people come in at times and want to talk to us about marital things. There were 3 major things that people talked to us about. And they would talk to us about sex, and they would talk to us about money, and the third was communication. We discovered in life the sex aspect usually takes care of it pretty much on its own if you'll take care of the communication. The finances is usually directly tied to the way you communicate as well. And if you will work hard on that part of marriage relationship, the other parts just, God has a way of helping all of that take care of itself. And I know there's always an exception to the rule, but we discovered that was the rule of thumb. And we would just encourage you, keep the communication open. I have determined that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be a student of my wife, and I'm going to be a student of my kids, and I'm going to be a student of my God. And it's my commitment to daily focus on doing that. If I do nothing else, I'm going to attempt every day of my life to be in my Word. Do I make it every day? No. And when hell condemns me, I tell him to go, back where he came from. And every day of my life, I try to work on this relationship and with my 3 daughters. And in doing that, it helps the ministry to be a lot better. I spend a lot more time focusing on those 2 things than I do on being an assistant superintendent. That's just my present assignment, and that could change any day. But my relationship with my God and my wife is not going to change until one of us leave this earth. And so I have to work on that. So, any questions, any comments, any thoughts? Thanks, Damien. He doesn't even know what we're talking about. He just walks in. Yeah, Destiny.
So you just talked about how your boundaries and your strategy and all these things for a successful marriage and ministry changes with seasons. How do you work ahead of time instead of waiting for seasons to change? If you're sensing somebody might have a new job or go back to school in the next year, or when you get ready to have kids, how can you be preemptive and working toward those things instead of waiting until you're in a new season and then be okay, we got to figure this out?
I would like to say, Bethany, that, you can always figure that out before. You want me to just be real honest?
Yeah.
Okay. I know every way I'm going to steer my truck in a few minutes when I get in it, but I can't steer it at all until I start moving. Mm-hmm. And more for us in life has been that we made determinations up front that I'm going to steer the truck. Yeah. I'm going to drive. I'm going to go somewhere. But the response to a pothole or somebody slamming on the brakes or a child running out or whatever takes place, you do those as you go. And for us, there's some general things that we could make decisions on. But for the most part in our lives, we have reacted as we're driving, as we're going through life. And that is not a lack of planning, because we're not wired that way. We plan ahead. Yeah. But we've just learned that that's more realistic, because life happens and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what. Now, if it's a school thing, you may need to save some money and say, we got to give this up so I can go to school this night. Some of that's real obvious. But even in that's going to create a whole bunch of new things that need to be maneuvered through as you go forward.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, when you do start planning to have kids, okay, so let's plan to have kids. But you never know, like with us, it was an interesting season of life, because at one point we had one in high school, one in junior high, and one in elementary. Well, obviously they're all going a different direction, totally different age groups, so you're having to relate, in different ways to all of them. And so your life is not always going to look the same all the time. And and it's like he said, you're just going to be in things and have to figure it out along the way.
And I think if you can find somebody that can help you that's been through those seasons, the real practical side of things. It always used to kind of bug me when somebody come into my office and they wanted to talk with Cindy and I about marriage. And I said, well, where did you get your information? Well, I went to this counselor. Well, you find out this counselor's been divorced 3 times. It's like, dude, why would you go to somebody that's been divorced 3 times to figure out how to keep your marriage together? Right? Does that make sense? So why do we often go to people that we shouldn't be asking the questions to? It's like the 2 drunks sitting on a bar stool saying, we ought to quit drinking. Well, they're not going to help each other quit drinking. They need to find somebody that is beyond that, and they have quit drinking. So here's the rule of thumb for us, at least. We always tried to find somebody that was just ahead of us, whether it was ministry or marriage, and said, how did you do this? And find somebody that, if we looked at their life, realizing they're not perfect by any means, but in looking at their life, we said, we would kind of like to be like those guys. We really respect them. The kids all love Jesus, and they all love them, and they're not ticked off at the church. How did you do that? For me, I had a good example. 3 siblings, all of us raised in the ministry environment I was raised in. And I want to be cautious about diving off into this one, because it could be huge. Maybe for a marriage retreat, it would be better. But with your children, when your kids start coming, why do we think, falsely, that it has to be family and ministry? I'm a product of family and ministry. Not forced, but invited to be part of. And as a result, I have 3 siblings, all of whom love Jesus. As far as I know, down through my family, most all of them are walking with God. All of the nephews and nieces and our kids, and all of them absolutely love to walk with God. And we didn't separate marriage, ministry or from marriage and family. We said, this is what we're called to as a family. And we did that. Now, does that mean that I was so dogmatic that if on a Wednesday night, the kids had a game and we had church, I had to go to church? They knew that. But there were times, depending on where you are in life, and I can't just make absolute statements, but there were times when it was more important for mom to be at that event with the kids at the school than it was for her to be at our church. But you've got to figure that out before you're God. As a lead pastor, with each other, the 2 of you before you're God. That's what I mean. So those are the things you steer through in life. You do. Don't look at, I see some people that say, well, our kids are now here, so my wife can never be involved in ministry. And I want to say, who said? Did God call you to be in ministry or not? Well, yeah, but we don't want our kids to be ministry to be forced on them. It's not going to be forced on them. Not if you love them and you do it together with them. At the same time, don't force your kids on ministry. Don't force them on the people in the places, because sometimes preachers' kids are the most obnoxious there ever was, because they're always around kids from the time they're this age, and they don't know what's appropriate, and they shouldn't be pushed, so you got to work. That's the steering. That's the working through. So I don't know if that helps, hopefully, Bethany. Any other comments or questions? Or thoughts? Yeah.
In your years of ministry with you and your wife, do you guys feel that it's important to do devotions by yourselves and do devotions as a married
This is how we're both wired. So I can't speak for how you and your wife are wired. For us to sit down and do devotions together probably isn't going to work. Because I do them one way, he does them a different way. And so for us, and he's a total morning person, so he gets up first thing, goes to the gym, goes to the office, does devotions. When he's at home, like this morning when I'm trying to get ready, he's already doing devotions. I don't do that. After I'm up and I'm around for a while, and then I'll sit down and do mine. So for us, it's not going to look that same. Now, if you wanted to, if that's how you guys are wired and you want to do them together, then I'd say, yeah, do them together. Build on that basis of your relationship.
But the bottom line is you need to be doing it.
Yeah.
Both of you. And so we all know that, right? I mean, that's the given. So then we have to figure out what works for us. Would I absolutely love it? I think in a perfect, Lifetime movie type setting, for the women, they would understand that in that perfect unreal world that guys can't live up to, that world I'm talking about. In that world, it just seems so cool and so in style if the two of us sat down every morning with our devotions and our cup of whatever, and we just loved it. But it doesn't work for us. We tried to force it early on. It didn't work for us then. It doesn't work for us now. And the devotions with our kids had to change from a lot over the years. The way we did with some sort of a daily discipline with our kids. It looks so much different. And I mean, we had to adjust from being so spiritual that we had to do it every, 5 days a week to let's just do it during the school days. And then it evolved to where we didn't even do it in the summer because it just didn't work.
Yeah. Well, and when he's talking about that, our girls just knew during the school year, and then having them all such a different age gap, they just knew at 7:30 every morning, you better be sitting in the living room because it's time for devotions. So
short and sweet.
Short and sweet. I mean, it was very short, prayed together, did a short devotional, and then they finished getting ready and were out the door. And so it was just a matter of, the timing of it. But
yeah, and you've got to figure that out. So that worked. In the summer, we just didn't do them. But if you're all together as a family, walking with God and doing ministry, there should be enough going on that they just get it. The fact is this. I always wanted to hang around certain people. And during my life, I found certain people I just wanted to hang out with them. Because I learned that I would learn more on accident from certain people than I could intentionally with others. And I hope that I would always create an environment that my kids could follow our example. Was I perfect? No. But man, you talk about it when you're not perfect and when you blow it. And families is a great test for how all of that works. And then you hopefully extend that on in your ministry. One of my statements about my life is, I've said often, and this comes from being a pastor, Mike would appreciate this, and some of you lead pastors in ministry for years. You get ready to do a funeral, and all of a sudden the eulogy's read, and you go, who is that? It's not the dude I knew. He was an idiot, man. He didn't walk, he beat his wife and kicked his dog and did all, and they come to the funeral and everybody lies. And so my statement for me is, I want to live my life in such a way that people don't have to lie about me in my funeral. And where does that start? Isn't that more important at home than anywhere? Because that's where you really are. And so I don't know what's right and wrong, but you and your wife really need to have, conversation, what works for them. And for us, a lot of it was, honestly, I'm up. She said it. I just hit the floor running in the mornings, and while I do devotions early, it's usually long before she's up. And there's anything wrong with that. It's just the way it was. And by the way, with our kids, I would get up and go to the gym early in the morning. Not because I love to, especially when I was pastoring and we were busy every night, but I would do that early because that was a priority in my life, and I would come back to the house and do the devotions. So we had to figure out how that worked before I went to the office or wherever I was going. Any other questions? Comments? Thoughts? I know this, God wants you to succeed. We don't have all the answers, but honestly, if you just sit down and talk and include God in that conversation, God has them all. And honestly, somebody asked in the other workshop this morning something. I said, I don't mean to sound like your question isn't real important and deserves a really long, great answer, but it's a short answer. And the short answer to managing your ministry without losing your marriage is still communication. It's loving God, loving others, which starts with your spouse and your kids. And if you'll do these two things, everything else will hang on that. See, it applies. You've got to do it. The problem is life comes at us at a furious pace. And before you know it, we're caught up in things and you have to readjust. But how many times, hopefully not often, and hopefully not when I'm coming towards you, but how many times in a car you even can start drifting a little bit and you have to come over and they put these little ripple things on the side to let you know so you can come back? They're there to kind of shock you back into an awareness. The Holy Spirit does the same thing. If you will be open to Him and you will posture yourself in such a way that He can speak, just like the ripples on the side of the highway, when you get a little too close to where you're not supposed to be, He'll let you know. He'll let you know. And when I have somebody that God has given me to complete me in every way of life, and I allow her to be a voice in my life, an accountability in my life, then when I get a little bit close to those ripples, not only do I have the voice of the Holy Spirit, but I have the voice of my wife. I have the voice of her helping me, and it brings us back into line. And see, the other thing with marriage is, honestly, it just takes practice. You know, you see old people like us that's been married a long time, and you go, oh, they got a great marriage. We do. But it hasn't been great all along. But we made a decision from day one. We're going to fight through this thing, whatever it takes. And some of you have heard more of our story, and you know that it included a lot of things that I'm not proud of. But the reality of it is we kept coming back to a God who is a God of second and third and fourth and 100 chances. A God that never quits on us.
And there's, you're young and you're married, but like I said earlier, there's going to be seasons probably in your marriage you really don't like each other so much. And I remember for us, I loved him, but there were times I didn't like him too much. But the thing of it is when I said I do, I meant I do, even through the hard times and through the times that I honestly just, didn't care for him or whatever. And it's easy with a friendship to just go, I'm walking away from that friendship, but I'm not walking away from this. And I think that you have to determine beforehand, before you get married or when you're first married or whatever, no matter what, we're going to work through it. And that includes the hard seasons of life that were ugly and not easy. And do what you need to do. I mean, I remember so many times I just, out loud would say, I just choose to love him. I choose to love him. And, the scripture kept going through my mind that, by the words that I speak, I'm snared by those words. And I just chose to speak words of life when I didn't feel too much life coming through for it. And, and you just have to work through the hard seasons.
Everything we do is a decision, right? We decide to serve God. We decide to go into ministry. We decide to be married. We decide to be godly instead of godless. We decide all those things, right? And then we continually work on that. But when you make the decision and you partner and it lines up with God and His Word, you have to go back to one of my opening statements. The devil's against you, God is for you, but you get the deciding vote. What's your choice? Don't tell me ministry and marriage can't work. Yes, it can. Now, it may not work for you, but if God has called you to be in that, God has a plan that is bigger than me and Cindy or James Dobson or any other guru you might run to for some sort of insight. And I'm not saying you don't go to that. Of course you do. But don't bypass the most important, and that's the Holy Spirit who's within you. He'll help you. Be a student of God. Be a student of your family. And God will help your marriage and ministry to succeed. So I think we're out of time. Actually, about 3 minutes if there was another question. Otherwise, we'll be done. Yeah.
Question. My wife has this amazing list of things she prays for me about. And my question for you is just, and a lot of things that she's praying for is like specific for men, like competitiveness and masculinity and all that stuff. So what would you say is the most important thing that's specific to females that you can pray for your wife?
That I could pray for my wife? Honestly, for me, the most important thing, I think, from and this is my eyes, okay, looking, but the most important thing, bar none, for me, is twofold. One, God, help me to know her the way she deserves to be known, and help me to release her in the way you intended her to be released. And if I do those two things, I've never been asked that question, but so as you're formulating the question, that's what comes to my mind. Is that good?
Yep.
Yeah, because there's nobody that can make you happier than this lady. There's nobody can make you madder than this lady. Okay? On the other side of that, there's nobody that can bring out the best in that lady like you. And there's nobody on the face of the earth, no Bible college professor, no outside source, no one can cause her to propel in the ministry and giftings God's given her as much as you can. Because God set it up that way.
And even this morning, remember when I said in the men's class, He's allowed me to do what He knows that I'm called to do for ministry and freed me up. If He was somebody that felt competitive or felt, He's not going to release me, I would really struggle that way because I wasn't being used in my calling and giftings that God had used. So He hasn't suffocated me that way.
Plus, I've done it on my own. It's not nearly as fun or as effective, honestly. It works better.
Thank you for listening to the 2013 Fusion Podcast. For more information on the Oregon Ministry Network and our events, please visit our website at oregonag.org.